to see you.
Hello, everyone.
Good.
I just want a few minutes with you of your time. I just want to. Is that better?
Yeah.
Hello? Can you hear me? Good afternoon. My name is Peter Cusano, and I'm the current president of the Friends of Lindenwald. And on behalf of the Friends of Lindenwald, I want to welcome all of you and our special guest, New York State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli, to the Martin Van Buren National Historic Site, and thank you all for being here. This year, on October 26, will mark the 40th anniversary of the Act of Congress that established the Martin Van Buren National Historic Site, a magnificent property originally consisting of over 230 acres. It was built in 1797 by Judge Peter Vaness and later acquired by Martin Van Buren in 1839 during his presidency. Those of you who have been on the tour are going to hear a repeat, but that's the way it will be, but you'll hear. I'd like to briefly walk you through some of the history, how this National Historic Landmark came to be. There were various movements to preserve Lindenwald, including proposed legislation as far back as the early 1900s, very early 1900s. In 1936, a group of concerned citizens, known as the Association for Preservation of Lindenwald, formed and began a plan for preservation and acquisition of the 8th President's home. In the 1960s, various initiatives were launched, including the National Park Service Historic Landmark Designation Program and the National Historic Preservation Act. Then it finally happened. Through an act of Congress signed by President Gerald Ford on October 26, 1974, the Martin Van Buren National Historic Site was established. But something curious also happened in 1974. The County of Columbia purchased 2 parcels diagonally across the road from Lindenwald, consisting of approximately 78 acres. The purpose of the county-acquired property was not disclosed until 1975. The County Board of Supervisors proposed development of a solid waste disposal facility to be located across the road from the newly declared Martin Van Buren National Historic Site. The Committee for Environmental Protection of Lindenwald was immediately organized. New York State Department of Environmental Conservation held numerous public hearings, and the Kinderhook Town Board objected. In 1978, the DEC Commissioner declared if the landfill would have been established, it would have destroyed the present historic and natural environment surrounding the Martin Van Buren home and seriously impaired the ability of the National Park Service to develop and manage the site as a viable unit of the National Park System. The 1980s began a period of renewed interest in preserving the historic and natural environment surrounding Martin Van Buren National Historic Site, with some great positive outcomes. In 1982, in a complete reversal of their previous position, the County of Columbia developed Martin Van Buren Park on most of the parcel that was previously designated for use as a solid waste landfill. In 1983, the Friends of Lindenwald was formed as a not-for-profit organization chartered to advance the preservation of Lindenwald and the artifacts associated with President Martin Van Buren. The same year, Columbia County allowed local civic groups and Friends of Lindenwald to develop and maintain nature trails at the Martin Van Buren Park through a lease arrangement. In 2009, Congress approved a boundary adjustment expansion of Lindenwald with the passage of the Martin Van Buren National Historic Site Protection Act. In 2012, the Friends of Lindenwald appeared before the Columbia County Government Committee to discuss the possibility of transferring that property across the street to the Friends of Lindenwald, and almost after 2 years of discussion, the county granted the Friends ownership of the property in December 2013. Now let's talk about the Comptroller's office. While Martin Van Buren's accomplishments were extraordinary, and he held many elected and appointed positions, like Surrogate Judge of Columbia County, New York State Senator, New York State Attorney General, U.S. Senator, Governor of New York State, U.S. Secretary of State, Vice President of the United States, and President, and local farmer, one position that somehow escaped Martin Van Buren was the office of New York State Comptroller. The office of State Comptroller was created in 1797 by the New York State Legislature. Interestingly, the first New York State Comptroller's name was Samuel Jones. He was from Nassau County and also served in the New York State Assembly, like our current Comptroller, Thomas DiNapoli. Since 1797, there have been two New York State Comptrollers from Columbia County. The first was Elijah Jenkins, born in Providence, Rhode Island, and settled in Hudson in 1784. He was the third Comptroller of New York State from 1801 to 1806. Mr. Jenkins, people collected positions back then. Mr. Jenkins also held the positions of Columbia County Treasurer, New York State Secretary of State, member of the New York Assembly, and Mayor of Albany. The second, Martin H. Glenn, born in the town of Kinderhook and later settled in Galatia, was Comptroller of New York State from 1907 to 1908. Martin Glenn also held positions of member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Lieutenant Governor of New York, and Governor of New York. Our current Comptroller, Thomas DiNapoli, is known for his integrity, independence, and steadfast leadership. His life of public service started when he was elected trustee of the Mineola Board of Education, becoming the first 18-year-old in New York State to hold public office. Prior to becoming Comptroller, Thomas DiNapoli was former member of the New York Assembly from 1987 to 2007. Since taking office in 2007, Comptroller DiNapoli has aggressively fought misuse of public resources, strengthened one of the nation's top public pension funds, and has consistently spoken out against fiscal gimmicks, imprudent actions, and government inefficiency. The Friends of Lindenwald are extremely honored today to have as their guest at the Martin Van Buren National Historic Site, Thomas DiNapoli, the great Comptroller of the state of New York. Please join me in a warm round of applause for Comptroller DiNapoli.
Thank you, Peter, so much for that generous introduction. It's a beautiful day for my visit. I want to thank Peter for being so patient and arranging for this opportunity. I don't remember the first time that you invited me. It goes back a bit now, but we finally made it happen. My friend Cindy Hall threatened never to speak to me again unless I paid the visit this year in 2014, so I'm so glad that I did. And we had a wonderful tour. I want to thank Justin and Sean very, very much. Give them a round of applause for doing a great job representing Justin's from Long Island like me, so we bonded right away. I've been to Sagamore Hill. It's not too far from where I live. I've been to Hyde Park, but I've not been to Lindenwald before. And I think it's long overdue for me to have been here. And I suspect for many of us in New York, we still have to add this very important historic site onto our list of places that we must visit. It gives you a sense of the time, certainly, when our former president lived here. But also, when you walk through the rooms and you hear, the great discussion of the history, you get an appreciation for the man. To think that New York has produced so many great presidents, and I think we probably don't spend enough time appreciating the fact that Martin Van Buren was our first New York president, first president born in this country, right? A native, wasn't born as a British subject. It's interesting at a time where we debate so much about immigration, that he was born here, but it's interesting to learn that he spoke Dutch, not English, as his first language, right? So, when we debate about language, bilingualism, so how his life points out, even back then, the great diversity of where we all come from has been an enriching part of our state and national history, not a negative at all. It's also interesting from my perspective as a controller, he gets into office and there's a depression. I got into office and there was a global financial crisis, so I draw inspiration from Martin Van Buren weathering that tough time. But also very impressed with, 8th president. That's pretty early in our country's history, and this is, he's of that generation after the revolutionaries that really defined modern American politics, the creation of the two-party system as we come to know it, and also, issues of dignity of the individual, issues we still grapple with. And to think that he, although he came on the Democratic side, and there was division of opinion on it, he was a very strong person that did not believe in the expansion of slavery. And to learn that he later in life ran again on the Free Soil Party, which was one of the forerunners of the Republican Party. So Van Buren as an individual and as an historic figure is someone who we really should rediscover, I think. And visiting this site certainly it enables us to do that. I'm a history major from my undergraduate days at Hofstra University. I'm kind of a frustrated social studies teacher. That never quite happened along the way. But when I spend time at a beautiful site like this, I'm reminded of how important it is for us to remember our history and recognize the men and the women who have moved that history. Because in fact, each of us today can continue to move history and make things better. I do have a great deal of pride that Martin Van Buren came out of Albany politics. Sometimes Albany politics gets a bad name. And Peter's right, although he never had the privilege of being state controller, he did everything else, right? Nor was he in the assembly. He was a senator in the Assembly. He still managed to do great things. And I think that's another reminder of the importance of, as another great New York Dutch descended president said, Teddy Roosevelt, we should pay attention to the individual who's willing to stand in the arena and get beat up sometimes along the way. Those are the individuals who make a difference in our history. Martin Van Buren is that kind of an individual. And I really want to not only commend our friends with the National Park Service, but really commend Peter and the team of the Friends of Lindenwald. The reality is, I know what happens in state government. We don't have enough money to do everything we want to do. I know the federal government's in the same position. So you need the support of organizations like the Friends of Lindenwald and the other Friends organizations that support historic sites across our state and across our nation, because there needs to be that sense of partnership. And you're well. How many years now, could we say, for Friends of Lindenwald?
Well, Friends of Lindenwald is 83, but the park is 40 years old.
I'm sticking on Friends now. So since 83. That's a good history for Friends of Lindenwald. And I know Peter has been dedicated to growing the membership, growing the involvement. I'll certainly get the word out there. If you give me an application, I'll join as well. And I have witnesses, so I'm definitely holding to that. And one of the Friends groups I do support is Friends of the Shakers. Their site up in Maine. And in New York we have a great history of the Shakers in this area as well. In the Lebanon site, I know there's been some great preservation in Chatham. So I do understand the importance of groups like Friends of Lindenwald to support the mission of historic preservation, and again, to not just view this as just a beautiful building, which it is, but this is a place where a man who had a major impact in our history, one of the most significant figures of our time, chose to live the final chapter of his life here, where he could reflect on what he had done, stayed engaged in the big issues of the day, especially leading into the split over slavery and the Civil War. I mean, this is a place where we should all come to reflect on the big issues of today. And with these beautiful grounds, it's a great place to walk and to think. And it really puts it all in perspective about how important it is to preserve our history. It is incredible when Peter greeted me to hear that there could have been a dump here. How discouraging that would be for people to come visit Lindenwald if you had to say, oh, you could find this easy, we're right across the street from the dump. So thank God there was vision and citizen activism and local leadership that stood up and said, no, this is completely inappropriate. And if the spin-off of that was to say we need to rediscover and celebrate the importance of Lindenwald and Martin Van Buren, I think that was really just an extraordinary outcome. And I think to celebrate as well the great figures from your community, Martin Glynn, and I want to thank Dominic for giving me his book a little while ago. I haven't read it yet, he just gave it to me. Martin Glynn, another favorite son of this county, who did get to serve as state controller. So he was a particularly talented fellow. I'm looking forward to reading that volume. But again, this part of our state, and each part of our state has its own rich history of individuals who made an incredible difference. I also appreciate being here because you reunited me with one of my old buddies. So it's to be with my dear friend, Pastor Reverend Stark Jones. We knew each other back in Roslyn when I lived in that community. We hadn't seen each other in many, many years. You picked a beautiful place to live.
Thank you.
And I don't know if you were related to Samuel Jones, the first control. We'll have to check your family tree out to see if that, when Peter was saying that. I like to use that Samuel Jones story because the office created 1797, as Peter said, and he was the first. Nassau then was part of Queens, so we weren't technically our own county then. But I always say you may not know who Samuel Jones was, but you do know about his family's beachfront property down by the Atlantic Ocean, because you do know Jones Beach. His property didn't become the Lindenwald, but it did become Jones Beach. I can assure you there will not be a DiNapoli beach name for this controller. It doesn't sound as good as Jones Beach. But again, there are these little nuggets of history and about the men and women who shaped it that we should all, I think, take a little more time to rediscover. And as I said, as a history major, I certainly know something of Martin Van Buren. I have exponentially grown in my appreciation for him just being here for the past hour and a half or so. So I really want to thank Peter and Friends of Lindenwald for arranging for this great visit. I want to thank all of you who called Columbia County home for really choosing one of the most beautiful counties to live in, with a great history of past and certainly great history that continues to be made today. And I appreciate this area being one of great, energetic, and enthusiastic New Yorkers. And thanks again to Justin and Sean for really giving us a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. And I can't tell you, especially this time of year where I do a lot of running around, this has been a real treat for me to have time to spend with you, and I look forward to coming back again. So thank you all very, very much.
The Comptroller will be around. Please have some refreshments and speak to the Comptroller. It'd be great. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.